necessarily bad guys, I can assure you that, and specifically Native American media, Native media sources, Native media outlets. My name is Shawn Spruce, and I'm the host of Native America Calling. We're a nationally syndicated radio show that broadcasts live every day on about 80 plus stations, mostly in the West, but other parts of the country as well. And we are owned by Quantic Broadcast Corporation, which is based in Anchorage, Alaska, and we have some of our staff and our leadership from Anchorage here with us today, here at Res, and just we've got a booth downstairs, booth number 423, and there's more information for our organization, and as well as Native America Calling, we have other programming as well and content that's available. And you can get all that information downstairs at our booth, again, number 423. And there is a flyer. There are flyers circulating around the room if you take a look at those. And there's a QR code on that flyer. If you copy that, if you just connect with that link there, you can sign up to win an $800 round-trip airfare ticket on Alaska Airlines. So definitely take advantage of that opportunity, $800 round-trip airline. So let's talk a little bit more about this topic before I introduce our panelists here. And for those of you that have done media interviews in the past, or you get contacted by media, sometimes you can be a little unsure. You're not quite certain. What is this organization that's reaching out to me? Who are they? Are they credible? Especially now in the era of fake news, and it seems like just about anybody with a laptop and a microphone can have a podcast. You don't necessarily know who these media outlets are, and are they credible, and what are some strategies, what are some tips for making sure that you're talking to the right people, and you also know how to handle an interview and what types of questions and what to be prepared with. So we're going to talk about that and the importance of that, and why it'll just make your organization just that much stronger if you understand some of those basics. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce our four panelists today. First up on my far left at the end here, we have April Hale, who is the owner and president of A. Hale PR Incorporated, and she is Dene. So give it up, April Hale, there on the far left. Next to April, we have Candace Hamana, the owner and CEO of Badger Public Relations, and she's also the founder of Indigenous Peoples Public Relations Association. And Candace is Hopi and Dene. Give it up for Candace. Next to Candace is Levi Rickert, founder and publisher and editor of Native News Online and also Tribal Business News. Levi is a citizen of the Prairie Band Potawatomi Nation. And seated directly to my left is Bryan Pollard, the Grants Operations Manager at the Associated Press, AP. And Bryan is Cherokee. Bryan, I'm going to go ahead and begin with you, and let's just start from the very beginning. Why is it important? Why should a business leader or a tribal official do media interviews?
Well, I'll start. Thanks, Shawn, and good afternoon, everyone. I'll start by talking a little bit about the problem that I see, particularly from non-Indigenous media, which is oftentimes that they're not familiar with our communities, and also they're often working on really short deadlines. And so they'll have a story, and maybe that story will be related to your community or a Native community, and they'll be sent out to get a quote. And so they'll contact the tribe. Maybe they don't get a response, or maybe the person that they need to talk to isn't available. So what they do is they'll just go to like the next available source, which is maybe somebody in academia or some other source that they find, and it ends up kind of misrepresenting the right perspective for that story. I see this happening a lot. And so I think what's important for tribal leaders and really everyone in our communities to understand is that we have to have an authentic voice. Our authentic perspective needs to be represented in media. And so I'm not saying that you need to be at the beck and call of journalists when they call, but I think it does need to be prioritized, because if they don't speak to you, they're going to talk to somebody else. And that person may not have the same lived experience. They may not have the same perspective that it's important to represent, so that people understand our voice and our perspective on these issues. And so anything that we can do to develop relationships with our counterparts in the media, whether they be indigenous or non-indigenous, is going to be helpful in making sure that those perspectives are represented with accuracy and authenticity.
Accuracy and authenticity, that's so important. Thank you, Bryan. April, I want to pass it over to you. And at this point, any tribal officials in the room, any business leaders, do we need any further reminding about the importance of doing media interviews?
Absolutely. A big part of public relations is educating the world, the non-native audience about natives, about tribes, the fact that we're still here and we're thriving and we have a powerful voting bloc and we have incredible enterprises. Those things need to be shared with reporters, with non-native entities, with non-native organizations and corporations. And when tribal officials and tribal leaders get that request for a media inquiry, it only helps them to tell their story. It's an opportunity for the tribe, for the tribal official to get their voice heard, to put their tribe and their tribe's issues on the main stage and have an audience. But you also need that coordination. You need that tribal official or that tribal leader may need some media training, may need some talking points. So there's a team involved to help prepare that spokesperson. And oftentimes that is a communications person, a public information officer. It's folks like Candace and I who step in as a public relations professional to help usher along those stories and make sure that they're told in an accurate and authentic way.
All right, thank you, April. And for perhaps smaller organizations that might not have a budget to hire a PR professional or might not have the capacity to, provide that much support, what can you offer? What can you recommend for those folks?
Absolutely, Shawn. Too often we see that there aren't many Native communicators or tribes don't have the budget to hire a communications person, and often those inquiries fall to an executive assistant or an admin assistant who don't have that type of training. And to those tribes, those smaller tribes, I really encourage them to invest in your communications, because you want it done right, and you want to be the keepers and tellers of your story. So even if you have a small budget, try to squeeze in, if you can, to hire a communications professional. If you cannot, then try to train one of your existing staff in ways to help communicate and get your stories out there. We live in such an incredible time now with so many webinars and technology at our fingertips. There are lots of certifications and online courses that your existing staff can take in way of public relations, media relations, and communications. So that is a budget-friendly way to help get your stories out there.
All right, thanks, April. And I like the way you use the term investing and thinking of it as an investment in your organization. And Candace, let's build on that, and let's imagine for a moment that you've got an organization, and maybe they're experienced in dealing with the media, or maybe they're not, but they definitely want to, maybe kind of polish up their game and get a little bit more proficient. Where do they start? Where's that first step taken to build that investment?
I definitely think it depends on your budget as a tribal community. And again, going back to what April said, prioritizing that, understanding that being able to tell your story using your voice from a tribal perspective is the opportunity to create the impact. And when you're creating impact, positive impact for your tribal community, you're shifting that narrative. I would also say that as someone who is going to be on the receiving end of that media relations training. That's something you can actually find as a service. I'm sure April and I probably have similar suites of service for media training, but basically that will run you down the types of interviews that are offered or covered. It talks about the do's and don'ts, some very general information that's going to be vital to giving the person that you designate as a spokesperson, more effective ways of telling the story of the community. If you are more on a budget, there are also organizations like the Native American Journalists Association. I think it's Indigenous Journalists Association now. They have resources that you can purchase online that are similar to like AP style writing. But it's from an Indigenous lens, and you can purchase those, download them, and you have those for a resource as well to refer to.
All right. Let's also talk more about trust, because one of the key components to a successful relationship on both ends, right, both the organization and the media outlet, is trust. And we hear so many conversations in the national narrative now with regard to the media and its role, and is it fair, is it objective, and what does that trust really look like? And at Native America Calling, we produce roughly 250 live shows every day. We have a team of producers, and they're constantly on the phones, they're constantly emailing sources and getting people to come on our show. And there's got to be that trust there, right? If they don't trust us to present them fairly and accurately, it's not going to work. And likewise, we have to trust them that they're going to come on our show and they're going to give us a good interview and they're going to be punctual and everything else. So let's go ahead. Levi, as Native media yourself, let's talk a little bit about that, what it takes to build trust and why it's so important to build that trust with the sources you work with.
Well, trust is a huge, huge word in Indian country. I tell my journalists all the time that we have been lied to, lied about so often that as a Native media, we are not going to be part of that. And we make our corrections when we need to. The old Bryan would tell you, in journalism, you should get 2 or 3 sources. And I have found, my experience, you can have 2 or 3 people tell you the wrong information that's completely false. And with embarrassment, you have to go in and do a correction. And I started Native News Online 13 years ago, and my previous life, I was like a head of an urban agency in Michigan, American Indian, and so I knew the leaders of Michigan, the tribal leaders, but I was not known outside of Indian country. I went up to one of the national organizations in Washington, and they wouldn't even let me through the door, basically. But I kept showing up at conferences. And I built the trust of people, and I think we have built our reputation by being honest, being transparent, and not lying and twisting stories. We give it to them straight, and I think that is what Native Americans want. Probably the best, one of the best emails I've received in the last 13 years, I received it at Christmas time from a woman who said, "I read Native News Online every day. You write the way we natives want it to be written." And I thought that was a very nice compliment. And it's really about trust, and we live that every day.
I like that story, Levi. Here's another issue that comes up, and we deal with it a lot on our show, is people come on, but they kind of want a little bit of editorial control, right? They want to make sure that their story or their issue is presented within a certain type of framework. And, we don't agree to that, right? I mean, we're objective media. We determine what goes on the air. We have final say over the editorial process. But, sometimes an organization, they might ultimately be disappointed with how an interview is ultimately documented or how a story is published. How do you deal with that, Levi, when you deal with somebody that's, hey, I did that interview, I was a source for your story, but I don't like the way you portrayed our issue. I don't like the way that was represented. What's your response?
Well, one thing we do is we like to fact check, and it's not about getting clicks. So we're strictly online, so we don't have printed papers. So everything's online, and it's really easy to change things online. If somebody calls me up and says, this is not accurate, And then sometimes I have to call the reporter and say, what was said? Do you have a recording? And sometimes people don't realize they said it the way they said it, and we actually have direct quotes. But so then you call them back and say, well, this is the way it is. Then you kind of massage it a little bit. But I guess my point is, online, I can go in and change stories. I can go in and there again, make a correction. This has been updated with more information. But I think that's the big thing is keeping that trust going, and that's, yeah.
Okay. Brian, another issue that I see come up a lot in interviews especially is when a reporter has a question or a topic that they want to pursue, and the person being interviewed, they just don't want to go there, right? They want to evade the question. They kind of want to skirt around. And as a media person, it's frustrating. And that, again, it kind of ties back into this whole notion of trust and credibility. What do you do as a reporter when you're working with it? Because, again, we've got organizations here, and they really need tips. They need strategies for how to present themselves and how to work with media in a fair and objective way. So what do you tell somebody like that when they're just like, hey, I don't want to answer your question?
Well, I think a lot of it has to do with the amount of communication that you have before the interview. I think that it's really important for tribal leaders, or really anyone, if someone, particularly someone from mainstream, someone who is non-Indigenous, who has very little experience with your community, that you get to understand them a little bit before you grant an interview. We talk a little bit about trust. Trust is a two-way street. I think Reagan famously said, trust but verify. I think it's important that you have some conversations off record with a reporter before you grant an interview. There's nothing wrong with you having a frank, off-record conversation with them just to get to know them. Where's their story going? What do they understand about your community, about your history? You can really feel them out and get an understanding of the direction that they're going with their story, so that you can kind of see what role or what perspective you might be providing for that story. You can also set ground rules. If there are things that you don't want to talk about, you can establish those things up front, and that way, if they deviate from that, you can just say, interview over. We had ground rules, you broke the ground rules, we're done. And they've broken your trust, right? And so I think that there are things that can be done ahead of time where you develop that relationship, you get to understand where they're coming from. And then also, I think another thing that's really important is before you grant an interview, find out who their editor is. Every reporter answers to somebody in the newsroom. Find out who their editor is and how to get in touch with them, so that if they go too far afield, if they do something that demonstrates that they are not culturally sensitive, or they're ignorant, or they're rude, you know exactly who to go to remedy that situation. So I think there's work that can be done ahead of granting an interview that can prevent an interview from kind of going off the rails.
Okay, thank you. And let's now look at that same issue from more of an organizational perspective. And Candace, I want to go back to you. Let's say you're working with a client and they're in the process of doing an interview, and some of these reporters, they can be really hard-nosed, and they can go after people hard. They can be bullying in some regards. And how do you coach your clients in a situation like that, or they could potentially be in a situation where it's going to be some of these, let's be honest, there's hacks out there. They're just looking to take somebody down.
Well, I think I would suggest a proactive approach. So if you are in communications for your tribal government, you would be surprised how many of the producers or editors of the not radio stations, but the media, whether it's tribal radio or it's, television studios, one of the first things that I did when I started working for a tribal community as their media relations specialist was call them up and ask them to tour their studio. It gave me an opportunity to meet their producers. It gave me an opportunity to meet their reporters. They said, here's our meeting space. We meet every Monday morning and we talk about what we're going to be, what's going to be in the program, what's going to be written up for the week, for the day, and so you also understand that if you're trying to share good news about what your tribal community is doing, you also want to know, like, when is the best time to pitch to those outlets so that, that you can get the coverage that you're hoping for. In regards to your question more directly, definitely need to understand sort of the art of pivoting in an interview, because there are journalists out there who kind of want to, catch you slip. So it's important to have that media training, and if that's not in your budget, then at the very least, understand the importance of the talking points, the key messages that you're trying to get out about what the interview is about, and then stick to those talking points.
All right. Thank you,
Yeah,
Candace.
Shawn, it's not dodging, it's pivoting.
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 I like that. Yes. Pivot. Let's talk a little bit about let's say you have an idea, you have a pitch that you want to make. You're an organization, you've got a new program, you've got an event, you want to get some publicity. April, how do you direct your clients with regard to just reaching out to the media, getting that pitch out there? What are the best tips and strategies?
Thanks for that question, Shawn. This is a really good question, an interesting one, because not many folks know how to pitch, right? Unless you have some of that media relations training. But it can be as simple as cold calling Levi here, or and having a conversation with them. I'm a big fan of the background, talking to a reporter and giving them background on your topic, on the issue at hand, and building that trust with the reporter, I think, is also really important. Once you build that relationship and that trust with a reporter, they can be your friend. I've known Levi for many, many years, and I go to Levi when I want to pitch a story, or if I have a client who has something big coming down the pike, and I want Levi to break it, I'm going to call up Levi and let him know about it. So building those relationships with reporters in your community is really important, but also beyond your community. If it's tribal media that you want to target, then start building those relationships. If it's mainstream media that you want to target, then simple cold call or cold email to them at first, and build those relationships there. I also, people, organizations are so quick to put out a press release, and that's great. I mean, sure, everyone loves a press release. I'm sure Levi and they get a ton of press releases every week. Be careful about the press release. Ask yourselves, does this really deem a press release? Is this really newsworthy? And if it's not, I mean, you can establish your own identifiers if it's newsworthy or not. Perhaps it's just an announcement on social media. Maybe it's an announcement on radio if you want to get to your rural audience. If it's a big, huge announcement about a water rights settlement or some big litigation that has been going on for many, many years, and it's finally coming to an end, yes, that's a press release. Might even be a press conference. So learning about these different types of methods and tools to reach your audience is also really important, because as I mentioned, we live in an age of digital media, of technology, where there's so many different tools to reach your audiences. There's social media, there's radio, there's direct mailers, there's press releases, there's press conferences. Figure out which tool works best for getting out your message, but also works best for your audience.
All right. Thank you, April. And let's talk more about those communication channels. And specifically, you mentioned cold calling media outlets. And Bryan, I mean, AP, you're a large organization. And I know personally, and I've been in situations before I became involved with media myself, I've had ideas for stories, and I've tried to cold call newspapers and websites, and it's like good luck, right? You send an email, it never gets a response. You call a number, it goes to a voicemail. I mean, I mean, it wasn't that long ago. There were a lot of newsrooms that still said, send us the fax. That's like the best way if you want to get a hold of us. Send us the fax because we'll see it. So, like, Bryan, how does somebody get a hold? Is it as simple as just sending an email to you directly? I mean, how do we get through and get that initial conversation going? Because I'm sure you get flooded with story requests every day.
Yeah, I think it goes back to relationships. You're going to get the best response when you have a relationship with someone. Cultivate those relationships. For those of you that remember what a Rolodex is, keep that Rolodex of reporters that you have worked with and that you think have handled your story responsibly and have been good to work with, and you had a good reaction from them and from their audience. And when you have a story that you want to break, I can tell you a press release is fine, but you really want to get it into the news stream. And so you want to take that next step after after publishing a press release, reach out to the contacts that you trust in both tribal and mainstream media, bring the press release or the issue to their attention, talk about why it's important, talk about why their outlet and their audience should think that it's important, or why it's important to their audience. That is ultimately what's going to get an interest, because if it's a reporter, that's great. They can take it to their editor, bounce it off their editor. Maybe the editor will say, great. If you have relationships with editors, that's really when you get directly to the source, because the editors are the ones that are going to decide, yes, we're going to pursue this, no, we're not going to pursue it. And so if you can develop relationships with editors at outlets, that's really where you want to be and the relationships you want to have.
Okay. Editors in the room, raise your hands. Editors in the room. I see one right here in the front row. Anyone else? Editors want to know who you are. Levi, yeah, what kind of pitches get your attention?
Let me just say this, that in any given day, I receive about 200 emails a day. Some of them are junk, but a lot of press releases. And one thing that really, I kind of wrote down some things to do not do. Don't send it to the newsroom if you have like 3 hours. 3 hours later, the event's going to happen. That happened to me. Somebody from Seattle sent me a press release and wanted me to stop what I was doing to publicize something that was going to happen 3 hours after I got the press release. It didn't happen. That's not going to happen. So timing is really critical. What would you say, Bryan? 2 to 3 weeks before an event is pretty accurate?
It depends on the outlet. I mean, the bigger outlets tend to work a little bit quicker because they have more capacity to do so. Smaller outlets, it might take a little time. So kind of know who you're dealing with, yeah.
And another don't is realize that, and I'm speaking for Native News Online now, we are not enrollment offices. I get so many people wanting me to check on if they're eligible to be members of tribal citizens of their tribe, and I have to just send them a nice note back. I'm sorry, but I can't help you. And sometimes people get indignant about it. But and you know, one thing among and we're talking about Indian country now. We've had so many bad things happen to us. We've been oppressed people. So emotions run high often in Indian country. We know that as editors. So we try to be very, very sensitive to that. Even when somebody's, as they say, out in left field, so to speak, we still want to be really, really sensitive to the idea that they do have a story that they should be told or they want it to be told, but we're not going to do it. And we don't get into the personality things either. So don't ever send me one of those. I'm not going to deal with it. It's like, I don't like Uncle Joe because whatever. I'm not going to write that story. That's not what we're about. So some of the don'ts when it comes to pitching stories or sending press releases.
Okay. Well, you mentioned, I mean, don't push it too close to the deadline, but you also don't want to send it too far in advance either, because you guys do have you're not focused 6 months out, right?
No. And we do get press releases 6 months out that people think we're going to, and I will send it to somebody and say, put this on the calendar, especially the things happen in Indian country. We do that, I think, every Thursday. So, yeah.
All right. Candace, I want to go back to you. And earlier I talked a little bit about nowadays, I mean, there's just so many people referring to themselves as media, so many podcasters out there, people with a YouTube channel, and we're seeing just less and less of an influence on what we might refer to as legacy media or even native legacy media, or organizations like Native America Calling that have been around almost 30 years, and ICT. How do you wade through that? And, how do you kind of pick and choose? Because, is it worth it, the time and investment to work with maybe some of these alternative native media sites that don't maybe have the track record, maybe they don't have the history, or do you want to focus more on established media and all that entails? What's your thought?
I think with anytime you're trying to share a message, whether it's about a program, an initiative, litigation, just really thinking about what the audience, who is your intended audience, and where does that audience live? Maybe they don't live on Facebook. Maybe they live in TikTok. Maybe they don't. Maybe they get their news, in an email newsletter. So just kind of understanding where your audience is so that you can meet them where they're at is pretty important. Also, if you're wanting to pitch to a reporter or a journalist, sending photos and or video clips will kind of help enhance that possibility. But make sure that your photos are high resolution photos and that you provide the photo credits, so that they're not coming back after the fact and needing to know additional information.
All right, thanks, Candace. And April, so we have different organizations here in the room and at the summit, and some are business organizations. You've got tribal nations, and there's all types of stories and issues that people want publicity with. It could be a business story. It could be arts and entertainment. It could be something related to culture or language. Do you find that there are certain, and specifically native media outlets that are better are better organizations to pursue when it comes to certain issues or topics that you work with?
Yes and no. Levi's looking right at me, so I'm going to say yes.
I did that on purpose.
I agree with Candace. You have to know who your audience is and where they get their news. Mm-hmm. So if grandma living in Black Mesa in the middle of the Navajo Nation only gets her news from KTNN from the radio, that's where you want to focus on. If your audience, the audience that you want to reach, are getting their news from the Navajo Times or from another print outlet, then focus on that. I like the idea of podcasts or even YouTube channels, because those folks have a niche. They have a specific issue. So maybe it's economic development. Maybe it's native artisans that they want to promote. So focus on maybe pitch to them and get your business or your client or whomever on those podcasts, because I can guarantee you the folks that are subscribing to that podcast want to subscribe to that podcast. They want to hear the stories that are being told by fellow artisans or by other entrepreneurs. So I think it's important to explore all of these different outlets that are available to you, and start building those relationships and start building that trust there. In terms of, is one better than the other? It depends on the day. It depends on the day. It depends on the issue. One may be stronger when it comes to writing about or covering, Navajo or Native businesses, and one may be better and strong at covering stuff about agriculture or environmental issues. So it's important as a communications professional, a PR professional, that you do some research on your own as well. You need to have that knowledge for yourself so you can better prepare your client, your spokesperson. And so doing that due diligence is also really important.
All right. And Levi, you look like you want to chime in here, and let's talk about Native News Online. And again, so many different issues impacting our tribal communities. Where do you think your strengths lie? I mean, are there some stories, some issues that you think Native News Online is better equipped to handle? Are you experts on every realm of Indian country? I'm curious.
Not in the slightest, but we have leaned in very heavily to Indian boarding schools. We've done over 235 stories on Indian boarding schools, so much so I actually got an email since I've been here. It was just this morning from some diocese, some bishop wants me to come and be part of a webinar to talk about our work with Indian boarding schools as it relates to Catholics. So repatriation is another big thing. We work very closely with some of the national organizations. The boarding schools, we work with the National Native American Boarding School Healing Coalition. That's a tongue twister, NABS. But I'm proud to report we have been to every single Road to Healing tour that Deb Holland, Secretary Holland, called, and I really feel really good about that. I was back in December. I was at the National Press Club, and they asked me, and I was there with other people of color, journalists, and they said, "What stories are you really proud of that you know you knocked it out of the park that the mainstream media did not cover?" And I immediately went to the Indian boarding schools, and such a tragic history that every single person in this room who's Native has probably been impacted by it, whether you know it or not, and that historical trauma and everything else is really real. And so I think it goes back to my grandmother who went to Genoa Indian boarding school. It's probably why we leaned into it. And we reached the point of, our intention was to go to 3. And somehow, as I went out on the road to healing, I just said, we need to go to every one of these. And I think it was really important. And Brad used to work at NAB, so he's seen me there. And I'm really proud of our work. And it's not, I don't say that with any arrogance, but I'm just, sometimes you're just proud of the work that you do. And I know that the stories have to be told. They have to be told. So often the mainstream media do the one and done. I know that NBC sent a crew of, I think, 3 up to Harbor Springs, where there was a boarding school that closed in the mid-'80s, 1980s. And by the time it got on the NBC news, nightly news, it was a Sunday night for 2-minute segment. And you can't really do anything with that. I mean, there was not a whole lot of knowledge that was given, and we just, like I said, we try to knock it out of the park when it comes to that. We are going to pivot, I like that word, to election coverage this year, and we're going to do 3 scientifically done. I was talking to Brian a little earlier, make sure we're doing it right, but polling of and surveying of Native Americans about their attitudes, behaviors as it relates to the elections. This is a critical election coming up. If you don't think it matters who the President of the United States is, just go back 4 years. I'll turn it back over to Shawn.
All right. Okay. And with that, let's go ahead and pivot. I'd like anyone in the audience at this point, any questions, any comments? Yes, I see a lady back there in a white blouse. We've got a microphone up here if you want to take a step up. Yeah, right here in the... Okay, go for it.
Okay, wow, let's see. Gosh, okay. Well, I think for some tribal council folks, because I've worked with several tribes, and so I've worked with different types of tribal council members and leaders. I've had council members who want to, they resist. They don't want to step into that role. And, I think that you can't really force it on them, right? But you can talk to them, maybe lean into some of that tension as why they're hesitant, because the best spokespeople for the tribes is the tribal leaders themselves, especially when you're trying to, pitch a story or, get some media coverage. If you've got a tribal citizen making a comment or a quote on a story, it may not get picked up, but if you've got a tribal leader who's speaking out on that issue, that's going to catch somebody's attention. I did work with a tribe who one of the council members were actually more proactive, and they wanted to get the media training because they were very passionate about VAWA and ICWA, and they wanted to make sure, because of their own lived experience and the work that they did on behalf of their nation, they wanted to feel prepared for it. So kind of being able to demonstrate the value of telling the story so that, there's no big omissions. So you're getting the full perspective of that tribal community from their own voice, I think is really important. So it's kind of a sell too. I mean, you have to try to persuade the council leadership to consider that as an extra responsibility. And sometimes there's just gonna be that resistance, and you have to be okay with it, but also, let them know, that if they choose to, and want to get the training for it, then, then those options and those resources are available. Kind of help them just get more comfortable. I think everyone's always like, there's the gotcha media. There's, they're going to say this, and I think that you can kind of demystify that connection and that relationship if you are able to just set the proper expectations with whomever's going to be the spokesperson, whether that's an individual subject matter expert from the tribal community or it's from a tribal leader.
Thank you, Candace. I just want to add a couple of things to that, Shawn. Media training. It's they council members, Native leadership, tribal leadership, they aren't comfortable talking to the media in most cases because they don't know how. Once they know how, then it might be your job to get them to stop. So I really strongly encourage those who are in communications or public information positions to get some media training for your spokespeople. Get them familiar and comfortable in front of a camera, on the radio, talking to a reporter through Zoom or on the phone. And you can do this you can be the reporter and act as the reporter and ask them questions. Also have talking points available for them. Talking points, research, background, giving them as much information ahead of time, learning a little bit about the reporter and the outlet too, and sharing that information with your counsel and your spokesperson so they feel fully prepared before they go into an interview. I think too often we think that tribal leaders, they can, a media interview is just, another part of their job, and that they should know how to do that, right? They speak in front of council, they speak in front of community members, so it's, it's not far from that to speak to a reporter, but it is. Because everything is on the record, everything could be published, so you have to train that spokesperson, train those tribal leaders to be comfortable telling the story. Because if they don't tell the story, Someone else will, and it may not be accurate, and it may not be authentic. So you want to empower your tribal leaders to tell those stories themselves, be the narrators and the keepers of those stories and the tellers of those stories. That in itself is really powerful.
All right, gentleman in the checkered shirt there, you had your hand up a moment ago. Question, comment, or somebody? Oh, I'm sorry, miss, yes. Okay. I'm sorry, I didn't have my context.
No, it's fine. Morgan John Comics. Hi, my name is Morgan John. I'm Deer Clan. I'm from the Coshada tribe of Louisiana. I'm the policy manager, so I do political strategy, strategic planning, implementation, a few other things. When you work with the tribe, you do a lot of different things. So I've been going a little bit more into our media strategy lately, and I was just wondering what your recommendations are for combating a biased media climate. You know, we have some things that are going on right now. We should be celebrating, exercising our sovereignty in the economic sphere by the omission of Appendix D, which allows us to keep more gaming revenues inside our own nation. And I've been seeing the publications being sent out by people who are talking, about the issue that are not us. And I see that the editors, not the editors, but the reporters are people who've known us for longer than I've been alive. So I was wondering what your recommendations would be for combating this bias, because it should be a celebration, but it's not, And I was wondering, do we invite them to dinner? Like, do we talk to them? What do we do? Because they obviously need to be re-educated about who we are.
Great question, great question.
Great.
Levi and then Bryan, go ahead.
Yeah, I do want to respond, and I'm going to take you back when Standing Rock happened. There were really two narratives that were going on. It was, I remember there's a big contingency of the international press there, and so a lady out of Scotland said to me one day, she says, what's happening here is not quite how it's been being reported, is it? And I said, true. And I guess I think back, and I get the press releases by the Sheriff's Department of the county of, I can't think of the county up in North Dakota, but it was really biased towards white people. I mean, supporting the thousands of arrests that they were making, calling us all criminals. Everybody who came to Standing Rock was criminal. And I know I went there, I'm not a criminal. So I just take offense to that. And I guess my point is, you need to get with somebody in the native media, not to be self-serving, but to really get the story out. Because that's why I started Native News Online, is the narrative has to come from a native perspective. And you have to feel free to call me, and is it Coshada tribe? So I got a call last week on that, and I think I'm going to dinner with the chairman tonight, or vice chair, to talk about that subject. And we want to do a good story, combat that. Because if you just excuse my bluntness, you let the white press do it, they're going to we have never liked how we've been depicted by Hollywood, in history books, literature. It's time for us to tell our own stories. That's why I started Native News Online. So get with ICT, get with me, so we can really shape our own narrative. It's our time to shape our narratives. Bryan?
Yeah, I think the basis of bias is ignorance. And I think if you can address the ignorance, that you are also addressing the bias. And so it's about, develop relationships with the media that are in your area, especially the ones that you think are showing the most bias in their reporting. Invite them to the reservation. Teach them about who you are, about your community, about your history. Because I think that as you educate them and they begin to understand who you are as people, what your history is, why your perspective is important, you'll find that the bias starts to tilt a little bit more in your direction. And so I would encourage anyone that, especially if you're encountering non-native press, and if they have been maybe not hostile, but they just haven't, you know, their coverage has been wanting, we'll put it that way. Work with them, develop that relationship, educate them, and see if you can move them more in your direction.
Training. Okay, go ahead.
I think another tool that you can look to is sitting down with the leadership. They're going to, of course, bring in their attorney, and then their communications or policy advisors, and maybe write a well-crafted op-ed or a well-crafted letter to the editor. That's a great way to basically get verbatim your ideas, the information that you want to share, corrections, you know, shifting that narrative again and using your own voice. But I think an op-ed that's written very well also carries a lot of impact.
All right, wonderful. Well, folks, we're just about out of time. One more comment, one more question, sir.
I think going back to what Bryan said earlier, trust. I actually turned down probably 80 to 90% of the interviews I've been asked for because I just love the person. I built a relationship with Darren Thomas, who worked for Native News
Yes.
several years ago.
Mhm.
So when I have to take stories or something I want to get across, I go directly to him. I know he's going to say it directly how I want. He knows my ethics, he knows how I feel. And I think that's a really good thing, building that relationship. And maybe trying to deal with counsel, I understand exactly. Maybe try to find a council member or someone who's more open to make you build that relationship with them, and maybe have them help you get across. It is a relationship thing, a trust thing. If I don't trust you, I even know you, you're not you most likely won't say no. So that's my point.
All righty. Trust, training, some of the key takeaways we're hearing about today, as well as just building that capacity and just getting familiar with the media process and getting familiar with different media outlets, specifically Native media outlets. That's definitely a major theme of our panel today. So we are out of time. We're going to go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank again our 4 panelists here: April Hale, Candace Hamana, Levi Rickert, Bryan Pollard. Wonderful job, and appreciate great turnout today, and looking forward to seeing you all at the 40 Under 40 Awards later this evening. So enjoy the rest of the afternoon.